Chu Lian really wanted to refute him like this. I really don't want to see you anymore. Please don't try to arrange a meeting with me ever again. I'm not interested in you at all. However, Chu Lian couldn't say something like that. Instead, she leaned close and whispered into Xian's ear. Help me block him. Xian was a smart one. She immediately shielded Chu Lian behind her and drummed up the courage to speak to Hao Bojian. Mr. Hao, please leave. Our madam doesn't want to see you. If you're still going to continue forcing the issue, this servant will call the guards. Hao Bojian didn't bother with Xian. He only stared dead on at Chu Lian, who was still hiding behind Xian. He pushed closer step by step until the girls were forced into a corner of the pavilion. Behind them was a stand of flowering trees. It looked like they couldn't escape anymore. Lianer, please talk to me. Are you really not even going to look at me anymore? Have you forgotten about the promise we had? Hao Bojian's eyes reddened, and he looked like he was struggling with some inner pain. Chu Lian had been observing Hao Bojian in secret from behind. Xian, when she realized his emotions seemed to be getting out of hand, her brows furrowed with tension. Hao Bojian was only one of old Duke Ying's students right now. He was born in poverty and was 20 years old now. Last autumn, he had gotten first place in the provincial imperial examinations and had become the top scholar of Joking Hall. Right now, he was living in the Ying estate to await the last 2 stages of examinations to become a court official, the metropolitan examination and the final imperial exam. Chu Lian knew that once the final imperial examination was over this year, Hao Bojian would get the achievement of ranking first in 3 consecutive imperial examinations, displaying his extraordinary talent in the capital. It was around that time that the original female lead had really started to hook up with Hao Bojian. Although Hao Bojian was handsome and full of potential, Chu Lian didn't really like him. If she had to choose, she would pick He Changdi. At least He Changdi had a kind heart somewhere deep inside of him. He knew where to draw the line with his actions and wouldn't go too far. Those who didn't have any limits were the scariest. Hao Bojian was undoubtedly that kind of person. Constantly trying to avoid him wasn't a solution. It was clear that Hao Bojian had currently lost control of his emotions. Chu Lian gulped and managed to gather enough courage to raise her head, meeting Hao Bojian's reddened, upturned eyes bravely. Hao Bojian, no matter what we were in the past, I'm already a married woman. The past is in the past. You should go your own way, and I'll go mine. Chu Lian spoke resolutely. She was so nervous that the palms of her tightly clenched fists were soaked in sweat. Hao Bojian could never have imagined that his long period of waiting would yield such a heartless response from Chu Lian, his face contorted with the force of his emotions, and he abruptly took a step forward. Lianer, you're joking with me, aren't you? That's not what we agreed on before you left to get married. You said that even if you were married to He Changdi, that you would find a way to leave him. You even said that I was the only one you had in your heart. As Hao Bojian continued speaking, the trembling of his body became even more intense. The lady before him was so pretty and delicate, like a blooming peony flower. Her elegant beauty and that subtle fragrance gave him the urge to pull her into his embrace and protect her from the world. He couldn't bear to see her suffer the slightest bit of pain. He had accompanied this flower on her journey of growth. He had nurtured her, watched her grow and slowly bloom. However, this flower had just used her thorns against him, leaving bleeding wounds all over his body. Chu Lian had only wanted to make things clear with Hao Bojian. No matter how much the past Chu Lian had liked him, that had nothing to do with her now. She hadn't expected that Hao Bojian would lose control after she had made her intentions completely clear. This didn't look good. Chu Lian felt helpless. Why was everything exactly the same as in the novel, except for Hao Bojian and He Sanlang? He Sanlang had become bipolar and Hao Bojian couldn't handle the slightest bit of emotion. Her dream of living a peaceful life was flying further and further away. Her demands weren't too outrageous, right? All she wanted to do was to live happily and peacefully as a layabout. She didn't want to attract any trouble at all. Hao Bojian, we should all calm down. Some things can't be forced. Chu Lian really had her hands tied. This place was so remote and quiet, and it was also the day of her visit. All the maidservants in the inner court had gone to the outer court to help out, leaving not a single person to be found around here. If Hao Bojian lost control of his emotions and tried to do something, she would definitely be the one on the losing end. Xian was just a young girl. She couldn't hold a full-grown man back. The scorching gaze that had been fixed onto Chu Lian cooled down instantly. It seemed like Hao Bojian couldn't bear with it any longer. He pulled Xian away and reached out to grab Chu Lian. Since Chu Lian was no longer the Chu Lian of the past, her guard had already been up against Hao Bojian. The moment he had reached for Xian, she had already begun to dodge to the other side. Chu Lian quickly took a few steps away from him, increasing the distance between her and Hao Bojian. The two of them stood facing each other in the pavilion. Not far away, behind a flowering tree, He Changdi had seen everything that had happened from the start. From here, although he could see their every action, he couldn't hear what they were saying at all. However, in his eyes, it was Chu Lian who had found an excuse to rest here in this pavilion in He Court. Madame Rong had then left with her servants. Not long after Madame Rong had left, Hao Bojian had walked out from wherever he was hiding to meet with this wicked woman. This was what that wicked woman had told him herself before he had died in his past life. He thought that she had made it up just to spite him. Who knew that it was all true? Chu Lian, you've got guts. You're actually using this visit to meet your lover. Although they were merely husband and wife in name, this was an insult to House Jingen. He Sanlang felt like his head was likely shining a bright green. One following that, when he saw Hao Bojian slowly forcing his way closer to Chu Lian and pulling Xian away, He Changdi couldn't wait any longer. He came out from where he was hiding in the greenery with a dark expression, striding with large steps towards the paramours. He was going to expose them today. He Sanlang's footsteps were heavy and rushed. Chu Lian spotted He Changdi hurrying towards them just by turning her head a little. The worry she had been holding in her heart finally settled down. It was good that He Changdi had come. She no longer needed to worry about getting bullied by Hao Bojian and the consequences of being mistakenly seen by passersby. Since she had relaxed, the worry that had been on Chu Lian's face disappeared. She turned around, lifted the hem of her skirts, and ran towards He Sanlang. He Sanlang's gloomy face unexpectedly met with Chu Lian's. The girl running towards him was wearing a resplendent pink dress with layers upon layers of skirts. As she ran towards him, the layers of skirts were lifted by the wind, creating the pretty picture of a butterfly. The carefree smile on her face made it seem as if she only had him in her eyes. He Sanlang froze. Without waiting for him to react, Chu Lian had already reached his side. She picked up his arm in an intimate manner and called out in a coquettish voice that would give even herself goosebumps. Husband. He Sanlang's entire body had stiffened thanks to Chu Lian's touch. Wait a minute. Wasn't there something wrong with this picture? Hadn't he come here to catch a pair of adulterers? How did it turn into this? Of course, Hao Bojian was watching all of that happen. He stared at the scene with undisguised shock. He had never imagined that Chu Lian would do such a thing. She had promised the rest of her life to him in secret before her marriage. Yet she was now hugging another man's arm and acting like a spoiled child, completely dependent on her husband of only a few days. This huge change caused his expression to turn extremely ugly. He Changdi had finally regained his senses by now. He was distressingly uncomfortable with Chu Lian's soft body pressing against his arm. All he wanted to do was get her off of him, and if that meant physically pushing this damned woman away, then he was all for it. However, Chu Lian clung to him like a leech. He couldn't move her at all. With the distance of 10 or so steps between them, the two men met gazes. Sparks were almost visible in the air between them. In the end, it was He Sanlang who shifted his eyes away first. He had already lost the initial panic of having Chu Lian stuck to his arm like a limpet, and had recovered his icy cold expression. He turned his head towards Chu Lian and lowered his eyes, taunting her with the hard edge of his stare. It was the same as asking her, "Care to explain?" Chu Lian was also finally able to react. She noticed the amazing timing of He Sanlang's appearance and the contempt in his eyes, and her head started to ache. So he had been watching when Hao Bojian had suddenly appeared and started to bother her. However, Chu Lian was totally innocent. Since she hadn't done anything to be guilty about, she could raise her head with confidence. Chu Lian daringly met his gaze. There wasn't a single trace of guilt, worry, or fear in her bright eyes. Instead, there were hints of rebuke and coquettish flirting. Poor He Sanlang was beginning to feel a little guilty after getting stared at by her big, innocent eyes. He should have jumped out earlier to save her from Hao Bojian the second he noticed him disturbing her. Making use of the standstill, Xian ran back to her mistress. Although he had initially been a little flustered by Chu Lian's gaze, He Changdi's expression turned grave the moment he realized the change of his thoughts. This wicked woman was turning matters upside down. She had completely reversed the situation. He Sanlang was bursting with frustration. He wanted to expose this wicked woman, but she was clinging onto his arm and acting as if they were a couple madly in love. Anyone who saw this wouldn't believe that she was an adulterer at all. Madame Rong's maidservant, Kinner, who had gone to the east compound to get the burnsov, finally returned. When Kinner spotted Hao Bojian standing in a pavilion in the inner court, she almost leapt in fright. She immediately looked for Chu Lian's figure. After seeing Chu Lian standing a distance away with He Changdi standing next to her, Kinner let out a sigh of relief. It was fine as long as 6th Miss Husband, 6th Young Master, was here. What would they do if rumors came out about the newlywed 6th Miss and Mr. Hao? Kinner didn't dare to tarry and hurriedly walked towards Chu Lian. Greetings to 6th Miss and 6th Young Master. This is the snow cream from eldest young madam, 6th Miss. Please apply it as soon as possible. Xian received the snow cream from Kinner and pulled up Chu Lian's slightly long sleeves. She then gently applied the milky, translucent cream onto the slight swell of the blister on the back of Chu Lian's hand. It hurt a little when Xian touched it, so Chu Lian jerked out of reflex. Her brows started to furrow. Xian's heart ached for her mistress. 6th Miss, please bear with it for a moment. It will be done soon. He Sanlang was standing next to Chu Lian, so he could see that burn on her hand out of the corner of his eyes. His brows also unconsciously began to draw together. After Xian applied a thin layer of the snow cream to the blister, Chu Lian carelessly used her sleeve to hide it. He Sanlang turned away like he had been caught staring at something he shouldn't have. Hao Bojian was still standing in the pavilion, refusing to leave. He Changdi's expression changed and he instantly became a polite, elegant gentleman. Mr. Hao, what a coincidence this is, meeting you here. This was the inner court of the Ying estate. Men unrelated to the family were generally not allowed into the inner court. Thus, He Changdi's tone was full of undisguised mockery. Hao Bojian didn't give a reply. His gaze rested on Chu Lian for a moment, darkness swirling in the depths of his eyes. Pressuring Chu Lian, Hao Bojian made a cupped fist greeting to He Changdi. The corners of his lips curled up at a strange angle. It looked like a mix of mocking in return, as well as determination to obtain the object of his desires. He then turned and vanished into one of the gardens of the Ying estate. Kinner stared in a daze from the side. Although she wanted to report this to Madame Rong, she had felt Hao Bojian's icy gaze linger on her before he had left, so she subconsciously decided to keep whatever she had seen to herself. Xian could sense that the air between 6th Miss and Young Master wasn't right, so she tried to interrupt. It's almost time for lunch at the outer court. Hao Bojian had finally left. Although the last look he had cast at her before leaving made Chu Lian feel extremely uncomfortable. She was going to live in the Jinggan estate from now on. They were probably never going to meet again, so she didn't need to worry about it for the time being. The hold she had around He Sanlang's arm loosened. He Sanlang felt the change and tossed away Chu Lian's arms forcefully, coldly harumphing once. Following that, he bent down and whispered to her in a voice that only the two of them could hear. My dear wife, I would love to hear your grand explanation for today when we get back home. Then he pulled away, letting the threat linger with her. Chu Lian inwardly wailed in anguish. Hao Bojian had come to find her of his own accord. How was she supposed to explain that? She had even been trying to avoid him. After that, It was time to eat lunch with the various senior family members in the Ying estate. The men and women sat in separate areas. Old Duke Ying personally accompanied He Sanlang to drink over at the men's side, while it was much more casual for Chu Lian. In the beginning, Madame Rong led a toast for Chu Lian, then, they simply had lunch in quiet. Chu Lian wasn't familiar with the madams and ladies of House Ying at all, so she naturally didn't have anything to say. It wasn't until close to dusk that He Sanlang and Chu Lian were escorted to the estate's entrance by the people of House Ying. Perhaps He Sanlang had drunk too much due to his anger at Xiao Bojian in the afternoon. Even now, the smell of alcohol still clung to him. Chu Lian was worried that he would fall off his horse if he tried to ride it now, so she got Liu to support He Sanlang up the carriage. It was only after seeing Liu set her husband down properly in the carriage that Chu Lian got on. They slowly began to move on the wide stone road. Chu Lian stared at He Changdi, who was resting against the side of the carriage. He had the strong stench of alcohol around him, making Chu Lian's eyes water. She couldn't resist pinching her nose and trying to fan away the smell. Who knew that He Sanlang would pick this moment to open his black eyes? However, he looked sober and not at all drunk. His good-looking thin lips parted, but all that came out were words of ridicule. What? Are you disgusted with me just because of a small thing like that? Do you want to throw me out onto the streets and let Hao Bojian get on this carriage? Chu Lian frowned. She took a long look at He Changdi's handsome yet cold face, and couldn't resist bursting out in laughter. Then she reached over with a fair hand and patted He Sanlang's stiffened face. My dear husband, you have some really strong paranoia going on there. It makes you so fun to tease.